Hello, Facebook Live. My name is Jesse Nolan, and I'm the Membership and Marketing Manager for the Jazz Education Network. And normally I'm the host of these events, but today I am actually doing this session. This is called Getting Started with Logic Pro X Tips and Tricks for Music Educators. So, like the title states, this is not going to be a super deep dive into any one area of Logic. Instead, it's actually meant to be an overview of many of the features that I use every single day as a music producer, and that I imagine many teachers are now trying to use to create all sorts of virtual performance videos, or even to create materials, tracks, anything that you would want to use Logic Pro for. So my goal is to show you today just some techniques, some tips, some getting started things, so that you're not searching the internet, YouTube, for how to do the basic things that you want to do with this program. I'll start out by saying that I have never in my life taken a music production class. I run a music production company. When I'm not working for Jen and I'm not drumming, I work with clients all over the world. Some of them are State Farm, HSBC China, Virgin America, Banana Republic. I've done a lot of jingle work and corporate types of music for events and videos and those types of things. And I primarily use Logic. And one of the questions that was asked in droves before the session started on the survey was, why Logic? So let's start there. Why Logic? Why not Pro Tools? Why not another DAW? Why am I not using Audacity, which is free, or Cubase, or Ableton, etc.? Quite simply, for me, I think Logic is the best DAW for creators and producers and for educators. I think that simply because of the experience that I've had with it. Like anything, Logic is a tool, and it happens to be my go-to tool, or DAW, of choice. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term DAW, it stands for Digital Audio Workstation, or DAW. Some people say it that way. But it's any platform or any program like Logic and Pro Tools in which you can create and manipulate digital audio. So number one, for me, Logic, it's the most intuitive for me. And like many things, once I started learning it, I got deeper and deeper and deeper into learning the features and being able to apply them. So, jumping ship to another platform would just set me back. I do use Pro Tools. Most of my work that is put out commercially, I actually send to different audio engineers, and they mix in Pro Tools. Pro Tools is a great program, particularly for post. It's a really great mixing program. I use Logic because I am often more concerned with the creation side of things. Like I said, when I put something out, I don't mix it myself. I'm a collaborator, and I like an additional set of ears. But that's the reason that I use Logic. And right now, you can download Logic for free. So if you watch this session and you think, you know what, I want to jump in, go ahead, go on the Apple site. There was a link in the confirmation email from this session to download your free 90-day trial of Logic. The trial starts when you open and use the program for the first time. Additionally, Apple sells their apps for educators bundle for $199. That includes Logic. It also includes Final Cut Pro, and it also includes Mainstage, which is a live performance music application that is similar to some other things out there, like Ableton Live, but Mainstage is a little not as fully featured, but it's still a great program. And it's something that if you buy this pack so that you can get Logic, you may find yourself using both Logic and Mainstage when you return to live performance. So check those couple things out if you're interested in getting Logic. Let's get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about is opening Logic and getting yourself set up with some settings that will really maximize your workflow. And before I share my screen and open Logic, I want to talk about your physical environment and your physical setup and how that can help maximize your workflow. Right now, I'm sitting at an engineer's desk. I have a recording studio here in my house, and I have a lot of equipment. But for the purposes of this session, I am only using the computer in front of me that I'm talking to you on and my keyboard and my mouse. I will use my MIDI keyboard later so that I can show you how to record some MIDI, but I'm not using any extra monitors, any extra peripherals. I'm not using any fancy preamplifiers. I want to use just the computer, just quote, in the box, so that you can see what can be accomplished using Logic without any additional purchases, no extra software, no extra plugins, no extra hardware, except for one thing that I'm going to recommend. I actually have 3 mice or mouses in front of me. I'm working on a desktop, so obviously if you're working on a laptop, you'll have your trackpad. But I find that it's really handy to use both a trackpad and a traditional mouse. And in fact, I also have a trackball here that I use for some things, but I'm going to be using these 2 today. And the reason I'm going to use these 2, I use this one on my left and this one on my right. And so if you're going to be using Logic on a laptop, I might suggest getting an actual physical mouse. Why do I do that? Well, I can use my left hand to zoom in and out and scroll through up and down through the project and left and right very quickly. And I can use my right hand to click. So it's just a way that I work quicker. It's something that I've picked up along the way. I use 2 mice. The other thing that I purchased a long time ago that I'm not using today because I memorized them was this handy dandy Logic. It's called the Logic keyboard. It's actually a keyboard that has the shortcut keys printed on the keys. You can also get an overlay for your laptop where the plastic sheet just lays directly over your laptop keyboard and it shows you the shortcuts. There are tons of free shortcuts out there on the internet. I'm going to talk about some today. The ones that I use almost every day. There are a lot of guides and PDFs out there, but I want to get to the point and talk about the ones that I use the most often. So here we go. Let's rock. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to open Logic together. Okay. And we're also going to talk about this other program here in a minute. All right. So when you open Logic, I'm just going to go here into my Logic preferences because I want to talk about getting set up first. That's one of the most important things, is really getting your settings set up so that you can maximize your workflow. And so the first thing is right here in preferences, underneath general, and you'll notice that all of the options that are under preferences here cascade here across the top of the preferences panel. So one of the things you might want to change is the startup action of Logic. Right now, my Logic is set to open the last project that I was using, but sometimes you don't want that because the project you were editing last might be really large, and Logic can take some time to open a large project. So often I set this to do nothing so that I can just open Logic. And if I want to open a project, I'll open it. And if I want to start something new, I can do that. So I'm going to make Logic start up and do nothing. When I click on the audio option here, this is where I need to set my audio input device and my audio output device. Right now, you're seeing something here called Loopback Audio. That's a special program I'm using so that you will be able to hear me and Logic at the same time. I'll show you how to use Loopback at the end of this session. For everybody else out there, you're most likely going to want to have this set, the output in particular, on built-in output or headphones if you have your headphones plugged in. But if you are using Logic and you can't hear what you're doing or your playback and you've turned your volume all the way up, this is one place that you need to check, is your output device, right? So you could set it on built-in output. And if you're using a microphone, I have a mic here called Hype Mic. It's just a little USB mic that plugs directly into my computer. It's this thing right here. If I was using that microphone, I would choose that as my input device. But the output device is very important, especially when you get started and you're starting to compose or you're editing. You want to hear what you're playing, so check your output device. All right. skipped one. In the recording panel, where it says recording file type, it should be set by default to AIFF. That is Apple's uncompressed audio format. Some of you might be familiar with it. Some of you may also be familiar with the WAV format. That is also an uncompressed audio format. That is a Windows format. I leave mine on AIFF just because it's native to Mac. We'll talk later about exporting your tracks in multiple compatible formats. The reason I came into this recording pane actually was to show you this overlapping track recordings section. And you notice that it's divided into two columns. One is MIDI, one is audio. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what MIDI stands for, it is a protocol called the Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It's what allows us to plug, a keyboard like the one I have here into a computer, and it is the language through which the computer decodes the musical information being sent to it. These settings here are important because there are some ways to maximize your workflow when you're working with MIDI. And we're going to talk about this thing here called the cycle in a few minutes. But what's important to know is that when you're working with MIDI and you're recording using MIDI, you can set Logic to do a couple different things. Let's say you wanted to create a drum part, for example, but you're not a drummer and you can only play one instrument at a time, but you want to create a drum part on one track. Well, you could use what's called Midi Merge, which means that you could record the bass drum part, you could go back to the beginning, hit record again, and just play the snare drum, and it will merge, it will add the snare drum to the bass drum. Likewise, you could go back and record again, and you could add another layer of percussion. You could do this as many times as you want. It's not limited to drums. You could do the same with a horn part, with a piano part. It's a little impractical maybe to do that one note at a time, but I think you see the point of going in here and working with these settings. So I'm going to set this so that when the cycle region is off, I am going to merge. And when the cycle region is on, I'm going to do something called create a take folder. What that will do is I can just hit record and turn this region on called the cycle, which I'll show you in a minute. And I can do as many takes as I want over and over and over. Every time I get to the end of one take, Logic will start back at the beginning and it will save the previous take and add a new one. So I could sit here and do, 5 or 6 takes of a piano part or something else and not have to touch anything to start and stop. Just keep rolling, and then I could use the one that I was happy with. Or I could pick one that I was happy with and add something to it by turning the cycle region off and doing a merge. And I'm going to demonstrate all this for you in a minute. Same thing over here on this side with audio. You can choose to create a take folder. You can also choose to create tracks in mute or create track alternatives. I don't use the other ones very much. I'm a fan of the take folder, so I'm going to leave both of my audio settings there. So to recap on this page, we've left the recording file type the same, AIFF, Mac uncompressed audio, and I changed the MIDI cycle region to merge and the cycle on to create take folder. And again, I'll show you what that does in a minute. All right. I think the only other thing I want to show you, we're going to skip these middle ones here. We're going to jump over here to advanced. And this is a very, very important one. You will not be able to do everything that you see in this tutorial unless you click Show Advanced Tools and then click Enable All. By default in Logic, these tools are not available to you. It's a bit of a bone of contention amongst Logic users that these tools are hidden from the get-go. The reason that Apple does this is because when they came out with Logic Pro X and last year when they updated it, they really are making a move to try and make the user transition from GarageBand to Logic Pro seamless. So with the advanced tools not available by default when you first open Logic, it is a little more akin to GarageBand. The real power of Logic, though, comes in these advanced tools. So If you're missing something that you see on this tutorial, please go into your preferences right up here, Logic Pro X, Preferences, Advanced Tools, and click this button here that I've already clicked and enable all. Logic will need to restart and reboot when you do that, but you will notice that you have a lot more features to work with. So that's just a general overview of how I have my preferences set up to work in Logic. I'm going to give you one more note about one more thing, and then we're going to dive in and actually start creating a project. The last thing is that Logic has a really robust sound library, which is right here. When you first install the settings for which are right here in the Logic Pro menu, excuse me. When you first install and start Logic, only certain sounds are installed. Logic actually has a much bigger library than what comes initially installed with the software. So what I would advise you to do is go here to Sound Library and download all available sounds. Download everything that's available to you. Some of you already said in the questions that I got earlier and maybe saying now, but I'm on a laptop and it has a small hard drive. Aren't these samples and sound libraries big? Yes, they are. Likewise, any third-party sound library or plugins, that's what we call effects and other third-party things that we can add or purchase from a third party to add to Logic. All of those things they take up a considerable amount of space, especially virtual instruments. And so my advice is always to put these sounds on an external hard drive. And you can do that here with the Relocate Sound Library button. I'm going to let that spin for a minute and click cancel. You can notice here that I have all of them currently on my hard drive on my computer. This is a very large iMac, and I'm not worried about not having enough space on this drive. But many of the other things that I've purchased and downloaded are on external drives. I also keep most of my project files on external hard drives as well. I don't usually have issues reading and writing to those drives, but they are right next to the computer and plugged in directly to them. So that's just a bit of advice with file size and drive space issues, is just to make sure that you are storing as much as you can, not on your main drive. Cool. Somebody asked what version of Logic I'm using. I'm pretty sure I'm using the most recent version. Let's see here. I'm using 10.5, which just came out. And there are some new cool things in 10.5 that I haven't even hit myself to yet. You can do some live performance grids, very cool stuff. We're not going to talk about that today. So let's dive in. I'm going to start a new project. And it's actually on that screen up there. So yeah, let's bring it down here. Okay, here we go. So you see this quick start window. This is the new feature, this live loops feature. But I'm just going to start an empty project. And I'm going to click choose. And before we even add any tracks, I'm just going to click OK here. The first thing I always do before I do anything is save. Save early, save often. You've probably heard people say that to you before, but in no industry is it more frustrating when you lose everything than music and video production. So save things early, save them often. And before I save, I want to talk about the difference between saving a package versus a folder, which you can see down here. You see this organize my project as package folder. Let's say I was just going to save this on my desktop, and I'm going to call it Project 1. Saving it as a package will put all, let me back up. When you use Logic and you record real audio, every single take that you do, every single audio file is saved as its own file. If you choose to save as a package, all of the files, all of the materials that are part of this project are going to be compressed into a single file that Logic can open, which is a really great thing until you need to find one of those guitar recordings that you made. And then you you won't be able to get it out of this package. You'll have to go into Logic, into your project, and export that track. If you save it as a folder, what happens is Logic creates a project file and saves all of the original audio as separate files that you can access on your hard drive, and then the project file references those files. The difference really is accessing them through your Finder or through your hard drive. If you use a package, you won't be able to do that. If you use a folder, you will. So why would you do this? Why would you use a folder or package instead of a folder? Well, when I taught music production at the university level, I would ask my students to save everything as a package, because then they could send me that package and I could open the file, and it was very easy for me to make sure I had everything that was included in their project. When I'm working on professional projects, I usually save things as a folder because often I need to find a piece of audio later and I don't want to locate it in my project. I want to go to that folder and snag it. Today, I'm just going to save as a package. Down here, depending on what you're using, what types of files you're bringing into Logic, you may want to check to save the movie file. Like if you're doing sound for a movie, you can actually bring the movie into Logic and do your editing and post-production here. It's good to save that movie file in the package so that if it goes missing later, you are now doing an edit without the visual. So these are the things that get included in that package. We're not doing a movie today, so I'm just going to say this as project 1. And now you've learned the difference between a folder and a package. Okay. Give you a little lay of the land here inside of Logic, because there are a number of places that you can customize. And so let's just start up here right in the middle. This is the transport control. That's what we call the play, pause, record, stop in digital audio. We call it the transport control. You'll notice that there's rewind, fast forward, stop, play, record, and the cycle region. You notice when I click that, I get this little yellow region, right? That we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail. But this, if I hit play, Logic will cycle this section that has the yellow on it over and over. So if I was going to make a recording, for example, and I wanted to just record for these 6 measures, I could set the cycle region, I could hit record, and I can make a recording. So let's make one. I just have to enable a microphone here real quick so that I'll be able to record into Logic. Okay, and now we're all here too. And I'm going to bring my playhead back here, and we're going to talk about some keyboard shortcuts. Number one thing, if you all learn nothing else from this session, please learn these keyboard shortcuts. These are the things that have saved me so much time. The mouse is great. You'll be able to do everything much faster with the keyboard. You'll be able to do everything real fast with the keyboard and the mouse at the same time. So if I want to turn on my cycle region, C for cycle. If I hit C, there it goes, on and off, right? Spacebar is play, pause, play and stop. So now I'm playing, hit spacebar again, it stops. Right? If I hit R, it will record. So let me show you an example of recording real audio. And I want you to remember that what I set up before was that I was going to create a take folder if a recording overlaps. So that means that if I allow this cycle region to go back around again, it's going to make a take folder. So I'm just going to click record here and talk into my mic. You can hear that the metronome is going. We'll talk about the metronome and the transport control in a minute. But we've got 5 bars and now 6 bars. And you'll notice that this will jump back and continue recording on the same section of music. Why is it doing that? Because I have my cycle region enabled. If I were to turn off the cycle region, this would just keep going and going to the right. And now I've recorded 2 takes, and this will be my 3rd take. We'll let this finish out here, and I'll show you what a take folder looks like. Okay, now I'm going to hit the space bar. All right, so I stopped my recording. I'm also going to kill this microphone so I don't have to talk into it anymore. Okay, and now I've got 3 takes. Take 3, take 2, take 1. If I click this little arrow, it'll collapse them. If I click it again, it will expand. What I'm about to show you is one of the most powerful things in Logic. Let's say I decided that take 3 was pretty good up until measure 5, and I made a mistake. But everything on take 2 from measure 5 on was excellent. So what I want to do is I want to make what we call a comp take, a compilation of 2 takes. You can see that take 3 is the one that's active. It's the one in the dark blue. These other 2 are not active. If I click take 2, it makes take 2 active. If I click take 1, it makes take 1 active. Well, how do I make a comp take? First, pick the take, one of the takes you want to be active. So I click take 3, and I had said that I want bar 5 and 6 of take 2. So I'm going to click and hold my mouse and drag. And now this take is take 3 up until measure 5 and take 2 through the end of measure 6. Logic does create the crossfade for you and going to the right. And now I've recorded 2 takes, and this will be my 3rd take. We'll let this finish out here, and I'll show you what if I were to turn off this, and there's 2 takes of me rambling combined. I'll show you this with some music in a little bit. But that is how that works with the setting that you saw me make in the beginning. I'm creating a take folder. I also showed you the cycle region, C. I also showed you how to record. You can either click record or simply hit R on your keyboard. Play and stop is the space bar, and you notice that I just recorded a little section there. If I want to undo, undo is exactly the same as in any other program, Command Z, and there it goes. All right. Let me show you the same thing now on the MIDI side, the MIDI keyboard side, and then we'll get into some other areas of Logic. All right, so right here, these are all, this area here where it says audio 1, if I add more tracks, they're just going to continue to populate down here on the left side. To add a track, you can use the track menu. There's a lot of helpful things up here. I rarely use this menu. Most of what I do is either keyboard shortcuts or inside of Logic. So right here in the top left-hand corner above your tracks, you have these 2 plus buttons. This one will create a new track, and it will ask you what kind of track you want, right? There are a few basic types of tracks. I rarely use external MIDI because I don't have any external MIDI capability other than input. But if you want to use the instruments inside of Logic, you would create a software instrument track. We'll talk about the drummer track in a minute, but software instrument. Okay, and I'm going to click, yep, that's correct. I'm going to click create, and here is my track. By default, Logic always brings up the classic electric piano. I'm not a keyboard player. I'm hoping you can all hear that. I don't know where my sustain pedal is. It's down here somewhere. Okay. So I've got the classic electric piano, and you'll notice that on the left side here, Logic brought up a library. So let's pop up here to these little icons in the top left. The one on the far left is the library slider, right? That opens and closes your library. Your library is, this library at least, is a collection of all the sounds that came with Logic. I have downloaded most of the extra sounds. So if I wanted to use not the classic electric piano, all I do is I click on the track right there. I open my library and I find a sound that I like better. So we'll try synthesizer. No, we'll try piano. Let's just use the Bosendorfer sound inside of Logic, which I don't think is fooling anyone, but. And this is how you would change and any other sounds. So I'm going to go to a drum kit, since I am primarily a drummer, and I've got some pads here on my keyboard. Cool. And I'm going to show you that little Midi Merge technique that I talked about before. The way that you can compile a MIDI take by doing multiple takes. Before I do that, let's talk about how we would get rid of some of these things. So I've got this audio here. I don't want to listen to that while I'm recording. I can click M, that mutes the track. S is a solo button, that will solo the track. R will arm it for recording, and this little guy here will allow you to hear back what it is you're putting in to the computer. These monitoring, this is an input monitoring button. These are only available on real audio tracks. You notice it's not here on the MIDI track because it will always play the MIDI back to you. This is here because if I were recording again with this microphone that I used before, if I don't want to hear myself, I would leave it off like that. That would be the case where maybe I'm singing in a room and the speakers are playing back, and I don't want my vocal to come out through the speakers. But suffice to say, that's what this extra button is. So I'm going to mute this audio so I don't hear it. I'm also going to jump up here and show you a couple things with this transport control. This shows you what bar and beat you're on. It also shows you your tempo, your key. There's a little drop down here, though. You can change this to show you other things. Let's say you want to see also the amount of time that has gone by. Right? So now it's beats and time. It got rid of the time, the tempo and the key. But often when I'm editing, I'm more concerned, if the piece is at one tempo and in one key, I'd rather see where I am in the piece in minutes and seconds rather than the key and the tempo that I already know. You can also make it bigger and say open the large display. You can show just the time. You can show just the beats. This is totally up to you and how you would like to see your transport control. I usually leave it here or here. We're going to leave it on this beats and project information for a moment. Also over here, you have a tuner. So if you need to tune either an instrument with a microphone or like an electric guitar that you've plugged in directly, you can use the tuner here. And then the other couple that I use often are these two buttons here. This is the count in. So this means that it's going to give me one whole bar of count in before it starts recording wherever I've set my playhead. So you notice that if I make the cycle region start at 2 and I leave count in on and I hit record, it gives me the measure before it starts recording. And now we're recording. If you turn count in off, it'll just start right away, recording right where you've started the cycle region. If the cycle region is off, the recording will start where you've put your playhead. So if I wanted to start at measure 9, I put the playhead there and hit record. If I wanted to start at measure 9 but give me 4 bars of a count in, I would put my cursor on measure 9 and turn the count in on. Let's see what Logic decides to do. Let's see if it crashes, which it sometimes does, which is why you save early and often. You can do it, Logic. All right, I'm going to abort. Option Command Escape will bring up the Force Quit application window if you're working on a Mac, and you can quit something. Let's go back in. And you'll notice here that if you fail, Logic does back your stuff up. So do you want to open the autosave version or the last version you saved? I'll open the autosaved one. All right, so now we're back where we were. Pretty cool. And that's why I save early and often. That happens sometimes. That's actually the first time it's happened on this computer. All right, so we were talking about transport. If I wanted to record at measure 9 and get a count in, I need to turn that on. Oh, I made a mistake. The cycle region was on. Let's get that off here. Logic's getting upset today. Be patient with your software. All right. So let's get back to our drums, and I'll show you how to do that MIDI merge, and then we'll move on. So I've got my drum kit here. Okay, and I'm going to set a tempo. Let's make it, I can just double click and type your tempo in. So let's make it 140. Cool, we don't need to worry about the key. And I'm just going to make sure that my settings are set as before. Good, I've got MIDI merge. So I'm just going to create a real simple beat, but I'm going to do it one part at a time. So I want my count in, and I definitely want my click track on, which is this metronome right here, so that I can play in time. And let's find our bass drum. All right, so we're just going to create something real simple. Okay, so just, 4 bars of bass drum? All right, I'm going to go back and record again, and I'm going to add the snare. We're making the Billie Jean beat. Super simple, right? And now we've merged those two together. If I didn't have that setting on, if it was set to create a take folder or overlap or anything else, it would be overwriting or just creating a separate take rather than merging the two together. So now if we had a hi-hat, okay, and man, that's wobbly, right? It's not good. So let me show you a few things. Oops, don't mean to do that. All right, so this is what a MIDI region looks like. It's green. They're all green, except for the drummer tracks, which we'll show you in a second. You can do a ton with these MIDI regions if you double click on them, or if you click the scissors, this is the editor, you will see your MIDI information. It shows you at least the drums, what instruments are being played. This is called the piano roll. You can also view it in the score. There was a question that came over of, is Logic and Finale and Sibelius, is that all compatible? Absolutely. All of these programs work with MIDI. I often compose things in Finale, export the MIDI file, bring it into Logic, and work in Logic. And I'll show you how that's done in a minute. What I want to show you here is how you can manipulate the MIDI that you have, whether it's MIDI you performed or it's MIDI information, that you downloaded from somewhere or you exported out of Finale, right? But I want to fix my timing. Now, I could spend a ton of time. You notice that when you look at this, you see this is beat 1, this is beat 2, this is beat 3, this is beat 4 of the first bar. This is measure 2. So you notice that my hi-hat is late. I could drag it. I could spend a lot of time clicking and aligning things. I could make this 8th note here. I could move this one here. I'm dragging, my hi-hat's dragging, my snare drum's not good, right? I could do this painstaking one by one. Or I could click in this region. I could do Command A, which means select all, same as inside of Microsoft Word. And then over here, in this little area to the left of your MIDI, you have this thing called time quantize. This is using a term called quantization. Quantization means that it's going to mathematically place your music based on where you tell it to place it, what you tell it to quantize to, and you need to tell it to quantize to the smallest denomination that you played. The smallest subdivision I played was an 8th note. So I'm going to hit Command A, select all of these things, and I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say 8th note, and if you watch this area carefully, you're going to see the notes move. Cool. So now I have a rhythmically perfect drum part. Is that a good thing? No. I like things that have a little swag or a little feel. But if this is what you're going for, if you're producing a guide track for like a virtual collaboration, you will want to do this way. You'll want to quantize your MIDI. You can also change, quote, the velocity or the volume of MIDI by clicking on notes. If I wanted to make all my bass drums louder, you can click and drag and highlight in here. So now I highlighted all these green bass drum notes, and over here is their velocity. And if I turn them all up, that's as loud as they can play. You'll notice in these instruments that the articulation changes as you turn up the velocity. So I'm going to bring this down a little, and you can adjust the balance of the drum set like this. So if I want the bass drum to be a little louder, red is the loudest. There we go. You can also do some really other cool things in here, and I don't have time to show you all of them, but I'll show you one. There's an extra MIDI menu up here in Logic, and there's a Midi Transform feature under Functions, and it can do all kinds of crazy stuff, like make a crescendo for you. Right, you see this? Now it crescendos from soft to loud with one click. Cool. So this is just a little overview of MIDI and how you can edit it here. There are a few other things I'll show you with MIDI and a couple other tools. So I haven't shown you this yet, but up here are your two tools. The one on the left is the tool that your mouse is all the time. The one on the right is what happens to your mouse when you hold the command key on your keyboard. I usually have this set to be my pencil, because let's say I wanted to add a MIDI region here. I can hold command, I can click, and I can make a new region. So let's say I wanted to record something in this region, but I want this region to start at number 5. I can also trim other regions. So I'll show you how to do that, and I'll show you how these tools work. And I want to show you that by hitting the key T on my keyboard. If I hit T, it brings up this tools menu. These letters on the right, the next one of these that I hit will be the tool that engages. So if I want to use the pencil tool, I can hit T, P, and now I'm using the pencil. If I want to use the fade tool, I'd hit T, A. Now I have a fade tool up here, you see it? If I want to use the mute tool, I would hit T, M. Now I can mute a region just by clicking on it. If I want to use the solo tool, I hit TS. Now I'm soloing things. T for tool. If I wanted to glue two things together, TG. So I'll show you how to do one of these. I want this region, which I will record in right now, to be glued to this region. But I want this region to start at measure 5. So you'll notice that this is too long. So the first thing I need to do is trim a region. So let me show you how to trim your regions in Logic. If you bring your pointer tool to the bottom left or bottom right corner of any region, MIDI or audio, you can click and make it longer, make it shorter. You can't make it longer than it was originally, but if you have room to make it longer, you can make them longer and shorter. So this one, I need this one to stop at 5. So I'm simply going to do this. Click and drag. Great. Now I want to bring this one over and align it. And do you notice when I drag that I don't have infinite places to place this clip? It's sort of requiring, if you notice, that it be placed on one of these tick marks. That is because of this feature here called snap. This is a feature I've grown to love and a feature I've grown to hate. I love this feature when I'm editing and I'm editing to a click track and I need things to stay on the grid. And on the click, I can make sure that smart is enabled. And if I'm cutting a region or moving a region, I'll show you how to cut things in a minute. If this smart snap is clicked, I can be sure that when I click on one of these, it's right on measure 6. And then I could click TI, for example. I is the scissors tool. And I could cut my region like that. right? If that wasn't enabled, if this smart snap wasn't enabled, let me show you what can happen. So I'm not zoomed in very far. I'm zoomed out. I click measure 7. I use my scissor tool, TI, and I splice. And when I zoom all the way in, super far in, you notice that it's spliced right at 7. I zoom, by the way, with my mouse pad over here, with my, just using pinch. That's why I have this. I don't like using these things up here. These are the zoom tools for Logic. Take forever to get to. This is vertical zoom. This is horizontal zoom. I don't like it. I use the vertical one sometimes, but most of the time I just use the Z key. If you want to zoom in on something in Logic, you can simply click on it. Oops, I didn't mean to splice. Get my pointer tool back and hit the Z key, and it zooms in on what you selected. So if I wanted to, for example, zoom in on, just this whole thing, I could click and drag and highlight and hit Z, and it brings that section full screen. So I don't really use these except to maybe do that. All right, so I'm going to record a MIDI region here, and then I want to attach it and glue it together. So, before I do that, I was showing you what can happen without Smart Snap connected. So let me turn Smart Snap off. I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to click here, right? I think I'm on number 6. Nope. Not only am I not on number 6, but I'm not even on a beat. And if I start editing without this Smart Snap on and I need everything to stay on the grid, I really just made a mistake. I made a splice somewhere between beat 1 and beat 2, somewhere between like the first 16th note of beat 1 and the second 16th note and the third one. I would never be able to fix this if I started doing an edit like this. Now, of course, I can do Command Z, but let's say I've already gone too far and I realize, oh man, I made this cut. I didn't mean to make it there. Well, as long as you haven't moved the regions around, you can glue them back together. So to do that, you'd click the first one, hold Shift, click the second, T for tool, G for glue, click, they're fixed. You can glue any 2 sections together that way. Sometimes if you're using real audio, Logic will tell you it needs to create a new audio file. You can say yes and listen to what it sounds like, and you can Command Z if it's not working out. So let's talk about bringing tracks in here now and bringing in real audio and building something for real. So I'm going to delete most of these tracks, and I'm going to bring in now a MIDI file that I made actually in Finale. So I'm actually working on a virtual project right now, like many of you are. This isn't for a school. This is actually for the city of Chicago. It's for artist relief for coronavirus, for COVID-19. I'm gonna give you a little sneak peek. You won't get to know who's in it necessarily. It'll be a surprise. It gets dropped next week. But I want to show you my process for doing this with professional musicians, and how this whole thing got started. And it's exactly the same as the process that many of you are going through right now to create your virtual ensemble. So the first thing that I did was I made an arrangement of the tune Sweet Home Chicago in Finale. And after I made that arrangement, I exported that arrangement as a MIDI file called a Type 1 MIDI file. And here it is, sweethomechicago.mid. A Type 1 MIDI file saves every instrument as a separate MIDI track. A Type 2 MIDI file puts them all together. I need a Type 1 file because I want to bring every instrument, trumpet 1, trumpet 2, saxophone, tenor sax, trombone, bass, piano, etc., in on separate tracks so that I can start making my temp track that I would then send out to my musicians and record their parts. So if you see the MIDI file here, Sweet Home Chicago, I'm gonna click it. I'm just gonna drag it in. Actually, you know what? Before I do that, I'm gonna, actually, no, I'll do it that way. Click and drag it in, and I'm gonna drag it all the way to the beginning and drop it. And it says, Logic gives me a warning. Also import tempo information. A Type 1 MIDI file remembers the tempo that you had set in your composition software. So I'm going to say yes, bring my tempo in. And we're just going to wait for Logic to process all these MIDI files. And there we go. Grand piano, saxophone, bass, another piano, some guitars, which we will mute, an accordion, a drum set, another guitar. I'm going to mute the guitars because they sound pretty bad, if I'm being honest. And so now if I just play this for you, here's what you get. Lame, right? It's just it's computer music, okay? And many of you may feel that way the first time you make a MIDI track, the first time you make a MIDI file, as you are doing these types of projects. I'm going to fast forward and bring up my final temp track. And I'm going to show you and talk to you a little bit about how I created it. Again, the first thing I did was I made an arrangement in Finale. Now, many of you may not have that luxury because you might be playing songs that are composed by other people. One of the ways, I'm also doing another virtual collaboration as a drummer for a big band that I play with. And what we did was we used the original recording actually as the temp track. So we just dragged that in, and when we made a click to the original recording, which wasn't perfectly in time, but that's why jazz is amazing. Had a lot of energy to it. So you can see here in this file that I have a bunch of these MIDI tracks. These are all the same MIDI tracks. The only thing I added were some loops. I have some guitar loops here that I used, and there are a ton of loops in Logic. They're up here in your loop browser. It takes a minute for them to load when you open them. And literally all I did was I found some of these guitar loops here that are 12-bar blueses. And Logic plays them in the key that the piece is in, which is E major, even though you can see down here that these loops are called G telly. So it was a 12-bar G blues, but because it's a sampled loop, it changes key for me when I play it here. Right, and I stacked a bunch of these together. And I added them to that MIDI file that you heard a minute ago, and here's what you get. Nothing fancy, but a 12-bar blues it is. Right? And I can loop these things. I haven't showed you how to loop something yet. I showed you how to trim like this. If I wanted to loop this guitar, instead of the bottom right or the bottom left, it's the top right, and you click and drag, and there you go. And you can loop it as many times as you want. So now here. Right, so I could loop all these guitars so that they would keep playing, etc. A good question just came in about, can you quantize audio tracks or just MIDI? If we could quantize real audio, all of us would sound like professionals. No, you cannot quantize real audio. You can use something inside of Logic called flex time. So let me jump to show you a little bit of that, because I realize that we're going to run out of time here, and I want to show you some tips for working with real audio, which is really probably what you all came for here, but is really the tricky part of producing music, especially when you're working with kids who aren't professional players, who don't necessarily play to a click track all the time. So when I finished this temp track, I sent this poor sounding MIDI track and sheet music to my musicians. And I did send -1 tracks to them. So to the guitarist, I muted these guitars actually so that he could do his own thing. To the bass player, I muted the bass part. I played drums. And for the horn players, I muted all the horns, just sent them the tune. And what I received back was one file from each of them And let's open this now. This is going to look crazy. There's a lot of tracks in this. Don't get scared. I'm going to zoom in so we're only talking about a few things. The number one trick with doing these virtual collaborations is lining up your files, lining up the audio. It is so very important that you tell your musicians to give you something on the recording to line up with. What we did with all of our artists and individuals, you can see who some of them are here if you look closely. What we did with some of our artists and individuals was we gave them this click track at the top. It's 8 clicks to start. You can do it, Logic. Doesn't want to go today. Let's see. Okay. Let's quit and come back. Aha, there we go. Still loading some things in the background. Okay. I had 2 projects open at once. Never a good idea. So while we wait for this to close, and we'll open this new one, I'll answer a couple questions while we do that. Cool. So a lot of questions here are about EQ, reverb, about plugins, about mixing. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time to go into that, but I'll tell you this. I never took an audio production class. Everything I learned by reading on the internet. And everything I really learned how to do, I learned to do by, quote, using my ears. And here's what I mean by that. What I mean is you need to trust what you hear. With these types of audio editing programs, it becomes very easy to start mixing with your eyes, meaning you want it to look perfect to your eye. You want the MIDI or the waveform that you can see with your eyes inside of Logic, like the trumpet playing, to line up perfectly with the saxophone beneath it. But what it looks like doesn't matter. What you hear is what matters. So you should always, always be mixing with your ears. If something sounds good, leave it. If it doesn't sound good, you might need to make a change, but make that change with your ears, not with your eyes. All right, here we go. We're back in Logic. We may talk for a moment about EQ, but if I show you anything with EQ, it's going to be a technique called subtractive EQ. So here's our click track. We asked all of the musicians to give us 4 claps or strums or taps on their guitar or 4 notes, staccato notes with those 4 clicks so that we could line up the track. You'll notice here, for example, we have a guitar feature here, and this was lined up with our clicks, and this is how I dropped this in. So those little dots there on the guitar, those all line up with the last 7 clicks that are in our click track. That helps me line all of the audio up very, very easily. So let's talk about the question that came over, which was, can you quantize real audio? You can't. You can use something inside of Logic called flex time, and I'm going to show you how flex time works by looking at the horn parts that I got back when I sent my music out to my my professionals. You notice that these are super cut up. They didn't look like this when they came over. I have cut these up because we are doing a different arrangement than what we started with. We actually have to make this arrangement longer, and I'm pulling pieces. But I want you to hear what this sounds like with what we call flex time, which is this little button here. You notice when I click that blue button, these 4 horn parts, trumpet, tenor, bone, they all have flex time turned on. So this is what it sounded like when I got these parts. Obviously, these horn players, they were not in the same room together. They could not play to the lead trumpet player. This is most likely what many of you will get back. You will get back things that are not together at all. So let's just listen to these professional horn players play what for them should be some pretty easy riffs on Sweet Home Chicago. And this is without the editing that I did. Okay, so you can hear that in some spots, right, they're not together. There's one, the attack is off, right? And so I'm going to show you how I edited this, but when you're done editing, it can sound like this. Right? Like some of the things that I had to really take some care with were these cutoffs, like right here, making those the same. If I turn flex time off, watch what happens to that cutoff. See it move? Right? And likewise, you'll see some other areas. So let's talk about how you do flex time edits. All right. And there's a couple important things to learn about them. So let me snag some real audio and let's make a new track. And I'm going to grab these horn parts as they originally existed. And I know that our tempo on this piece is 123. So I'm going to set that up. Okay. And let me go out and grab. I downloaded these earlier here. Here they are. All of the uncompressed audio that was sent in for this. Okay, so let's do something here. Actually, you know what? It'll be better if we do it in here. So I'm just going to create some new tracks. This create new track button, this new track button will clone a previous track. That's handy when you've already done some mixing or maybe you've added an equalizer or something to a track. Notice it's naming the tracks the same as well. So now I have a new trumpet 1, a new trumpet 2, a new tenor. Oops, I moved the wrong trumpet 2 track. Notice you can just click and drag and reorganize these here. So now I have these 4 tracks, right? I'm going to just snag a little bit of this audio. And I'm going to show you how to paste regions. So I can grab a whole section like that, click and drag, Command C. I want to put it down here on these 4 tracks. So I highlight the 4 tracks, and I want it to go right where it was, the same spot, measure 67. So instead of clicking, all I have to do is come up here and say Edit, Paste at Original Position. And the audio went up there. We'll move it down here. Okay. So let's just listen to these 4 tracks. All right, let's zoom in here. Okay, zoom in on those 4 tracks. And what I'm going to do is reset all of the edits I've made. So here's what this sounds like before the edits. Wow. This is not together. This is what I got when I received these files. And I can't pass that off as a professional recording. Right, you notice that the trombone player, he's actually a student. He's very on top of the beat. My lead player is almost right in the pocket. If I look at beat 2, Oops, zoomed in a little too far. If I look at beat 2, for example, of measure 69, look, he's right there. He's right on the money. And if I listen to the lead player only with the metronome, he's basically kind of where I want him to be. And so this is a good study in when you send your tracks out, you should send them to your lead players first. You should then make a mix with your lead players and send that out to the rest of the band. If I had had time to do that, I would have done it that way. I didn't have time to do that. I needed these recordings back in 2 days from all these people so that we could get the mix out to our other guests who are on this track. So let me show you how to fix something like this. Normally what I do is I pick one player. So I'm picking my lead player here. This is who we're going to time everything to. Okay. The first thing you have to do is turn on flex time here. And then you also have to enable flex time on the individual track that you're working with. When you enable flex time, it's going to scan that track and it's going to choose a method of flex time. I don't have time to teach you about all of these right now, but suffice it to say you should read about them. The one that I'm using for horns is polyphonic. Rhythmic works great for drums. There's a bunch of tap dancers in this at one point. I use the rhythmic slicing in order to line up their tapping because, again, they recorded separately and they don't have the same rhythmic interpretation, but they do now. So I'm going to change the rhythm here. I'm going to use the polyphonic mode on this trumpet. All right. And when I zoom in, I've got these 2 tracks soloed. So let's listen to them first. Woo! Okay, so here's the pickup, right? And here's beat 2 of both parts right here. And you can see that what flex time does is it adds a marker at every transient, right? The transient is the articulation, the attack of the sound, right? So this is the attack of the pickup or the end of 1, and this is the attack of 2. So I'm going to move where these transients are, but how you move them in flex time matters. You notice that when I'm up here, my cursor has 1 vertical line. When I move down here, it has 3 vertical lines, right? Watch what happens if I move it with 1 vertical line. Only the space before and after this transient collapses, right? So I'm collapsing the space to the left or to the right, but I'm not moving other parts of that track that are farther down the timeline over here. Command Z undoes. If I move with the 3 dots, though, it starts stretching differently. Likewise, you can also remove flex markers. So I don't want this one. This one is not the attack. This is the attack. So I'm going to right-click and delete it. It's gone. Now I'm going to align. I'm going to click this one and click this one so that I'm only adjusting the distance here between those 2 markers. Did you see that? Because I enabled this one and this one, when I drag, the rest of the information that's past this marker is not being moved. That's very important when you're using flex time. So you can see that now, let's just hear that much. Now I have 2 notes played together. So let's fix the end here, right? Dot. Click there, click here. Here's the cutoff. Let's see. I'm moving the whole thing. I got to click this one too. All right, and bring this over here maybe. Okay, you can hear that the smear has changed, right? This is where the smear is, right? And many of you are probably saying, wow, this is like a super unnatural thing to do. Yes, this is a super unnatural thing for me to do. I'm someone who wants to be in the room, live with the band, and hearing them play and taking the good with the bad. The studio environment is not the stage. What people expect to hear on a produced video, like the one that I'm making, that features some, fairly well-known jazz artists, I can't let the backing track sound like this. We're dealing with limitations, this crisis, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to produce a track. I hope that most of you out there don't think for a second that most of these virtual collaborations that you're hearing are not highly produced, because they are, especially the professional ones. And the one you'll see come out of my studio in a couple of days, in a week's time, is no different. I would continue with this process, aligning all of these horn parts. So there's the end of that. So now let's listen to this lick. Okay, we're getting closer, right? So now I'm gonna zoom in here, and I'm gonna fix this middle section of this lick. This is a painstaking process. So but it and da do, beat 3 is not together, right? You can see it right here and here. Beat 4, they lined up. So I'm just gonna move this just ever so slightly. My second trumpet player plays with, he's a little more relaxed. There you go. That's what it sounds like now when you make those edits. I would continue down here with the saxophone. I would compare it against the lead. He's pretty good. And if I get something like that, that's like just slightly off and not perfect, I leave it. I want that grittiness, right? Trombone is a different story on this track here. He's everywhere. He's very much ahead. So I'm going to drag him up here so that I can see him right next to the lead player. And I'm going to do the same, practice the same process, right? So here's the last note. Let's move that over here. And let's find where this one's going to sound good. I'm going to have to listen to that in a second. It's clear that this is beat 1. Okay, I could finesse that a little bit more, but for the purpose of what we're doing right now, I'm going to leave it. And then I'm going to fix his initial articulation so that the articulation at the start of the phrase is correct. And that should be good. We might want to retime one more here. So this is the way to answer the question that came over. No, you cannot quantize humans. You can use flex time to edit their performance for good or for bad. So now, here's that lick. Right? And that's how you use flex time, specifically the polyphonic slice or the polyphonic mode in flex time. There's really just a couple other things I want to show you, and then I can answer a few questions that are coming over. There's a couple other efficiency things that I want to show you. So let's say you can see here that I have like a ton of horn tracks, right? I have these 4 that I just made. I have these down here. I'm actually going to delete the ones that I just made because this is my actual master project. And I'm showing you around it right now. But let's say I have 12 horn tracks for some various editing things that I've done. Let's say I want them to all go into one, grouping. I can create what's called a track stack. I'm going to do this with a set of tracks that I'm not using, so I'm just going to create a couple right now. But if you look at these 2 tracks, let me zoom in on them. Trumpet 1 and trumpet 2. Right here that I have highlighted. Let's say I wanted to make those collapsed. I could highlight them both. You click on one, you hold shift, you click on the other. Then you right click. And you can say create track stack. There are 2 types of stacks. You know what, let me bring this window down so you can see what's going on. Create track stack. 2 types of stacks, a summing stack and a folder stack. A folder stack simply collapses all those tracks into one expandable group, but it keeps your the ability to individually control those tracks for mixing purposes alive. So if I use a folder stack, these will come into this thing called sub 2, which I can rename trumpets or whatever. And when I click this arrow, it will show me those 2 tracks. And you notice here it says trumpets. And I can hide them and make them go away. The other thing I could have done is create what's called a summing stack. So I went back, I got rid of my stack, and I'm going to create a new stack. and I'm going to create a summing stack. A summing stack now allows me to change the overall volume of this whole set of tracks by using just one fader, which you can see is called Sum 5. And this is Sum 5 over here, this fader. So now if I wanted to change my horn or trumpet mix, make them a little louder, but all together, I used this summing stack because I've already mixed my horns as a group. They sound good as a group, but I may need just to make them all a little bit louder to get them over the rhythm section or vice versa. So that's the difference between those two types of stacks. I will eventually, as I get farther in the mix of this piece, I will start to collapse everything. So I'll take all of these drums, for example. Let's do that right now. So these are all the drum tracks, right? And I could just say, create track stack. I can make a summing stack, and then I can change the volume of the drums with one fader. So that brings me to the last thing that we haven't even gotten to yet, which is mixing. And this session is now where we're going to discuss mixing, but I want to show you the mixer. To get to your mixer, you either click this thing up here or you hit X. Your mixer shows you every track in the same order from left to right as it is from top to bottom. You have a volume fader, which adjusts the overall output volume, and you have a pan knob, left and right. My advice, work with these two things first before you do anything else. The number one rule of thumb to remember is that you should never have a track fader that is louder than your master fader over here. I see a lot of people mixing in reverse, where their track faders are all really high and they're overloading their output, and so they pull their master fader down. No, the opposite. When you add an instrument, right, you only have so much space to take up, so much, we call it head space. You have only so much room in the track, so much volume you can add. So when you add an extra track, everything else needs to come down. So you may find yourself mixing 5 or 6 tracks, and you're peaking here, you're going into the red, your fader here as you listen back is, see, I'm hitting negative 0.4. I also have some other things to keep it there, but you want to make sure that your track volumes are lower than your master fader. Almost all of them are, except for a couple weird things over here. And I would also highly encourage you to experiment with panning. When you begin to spread sound out in the stereo field between the two speakers, you will see that you don't necessarily have to bring anything louder, just change its placement, right? If you can't hear the bass, try to move it around, move it to the left. Oh, now I can hear it. Try to find a place in the actual left to right sound field that you're working with, where each instrument can go, or maybe where a section can go. It kind of depends on what you're mixing. In this track, you'll notice that all my horns, they're all panned slightly left. I'm doing that because we have a bunch of soloists on this piece, and my soloists are panned slightly right to keep them a little separate from the horn. When you mix, I would suggest adjusting your volume and your pan. If you start to get into EQ, compressor, maybe we could do another session on those types of mixing techniques. But I would encourage you to go out on the web to do some reading about EQing instruments, and you'll learn about what's called subtractive mixing, which is before you start adding or boosting frequencies, take away the ones you don't want. If you're EQing a flute, before you add high end, take the low end out, right? Because there is low end there, and it's making the flute muddy up everything else, and it's making everything else muddy up the flute. Likewise, if you have a bass guitar, right, try rolling off some of the high, the very, very high end of that. Get it out of the way of the other instruments. But we don't have a ton of time to talk about mixing. What I do want to play for you, though, and I hope this might inspire you a little bit. You heard that really crappy sounding MIDI track at the very beginning of this that I made, that I sent out to my musicians. That is legitimately what I sent them. And I wasn't super proud of what I sent them. It was just to get the job done, right? But here's when I got back my tracks from my musicians. Here's what we're working with now.
Chicago.
Right. It sounds a far cry from where we started with super poor sounding MIDI. And this is, of course, after a lot of editing has been done. But I'm saying all that because I don't want you to get discouraged out there from sending, like what you think are poor sounding temp tracks out. Everything starts with an idea, right? And what was important for me was to be able to give clear directions to my musicians. I was very specific with my rhythm guitar players. I kind of give them a little instruction. I just wanted them to play rhythm guitar, nothing fancy, right? Same thing with the bass player. It was more about capturing these basic tracks because we're laying over a lot of other individuals who are being part of this. Cool. So I hope you found this last hour and 15 minutes informative, that you got some tips, especially some keyboard shortcuts. That's really what I wanted to make sure you took away from this. T for tool, R for record, X for mixer, C for cycle, Z for zoom, P for piano roll. What else? When you hit T for tool, you get your tools menu. So you can also learn the shortcuts for the other tools, like P for pencil. These are super helpful when you're working. And just the basic technique of knowing how to cut something, stretch a region, is very, very helpful. Let's maybe we have a couple other questions out there. Yeah, let's see. I see one here from Napoleon. He says, as a drummer, did you play real time with easy drums or just program them? What you're hearing here is actually me playing drums. These blue regions are actual drum tracks, recordings. They're cut up because we had to add like this whole section, solo 1. This is actually a section that was never played by my musicians. This was something that I had to cobble together, which is why you see a separate horn part down here and separate drum parts in here. I made this out of other stems because I needed to add it in there, and because I have everything to the grid, I was able to cut and paste and manipulate. You will notice something here. You'll notice that I use a lot of fades, right? So this little drum thing here is just a stop, a hit on one, but the file here, the drums keep going. See, there's more information. So what I did was just trim that track and add a fade on the end, right? So you can hear that I just created some hits. That's all they are. All right, that one needs a fade. You could hear how abrupt that one was. So I'm going to click TA. Oops. If I highlight them all, I can do TA and drag one time. Let's see here. So let me show you another trick. Instead of doing them all separately, I could group them all. So I'd come here in my mixer. I hit X to bring up the mixer. And this little line here is a group. And if I make group 1, now when I edit them, I can edit them all together, which is pretty cool. So there's a number of other things that will help you with your workflow. But like now, if I wanted to splice these, see, they'll all cut at the same spot because they're all a group. Using groups is a great way to edit at the same time. So I can do a fade here. Yeah, and I could continue, right, and making these fades, and it'll sound better. But I actually played drums for this. There is a track called the drummer track. It's very handy. I'm a drummer, so I don't often use the drummer track. But but I'll show it to you. The drummer track is very cool. I do want to, actually, you know what? I don't want to save. I'll come back in and make these edits later. The drummer track is really cool. It takes a little experimentation, but it can provide a fairly decent drum template for you if you're looking to get at something quickly. Unfortunately, there is no jazz drummer in here. I think that says something maybe about what we do, but there is no jazz option, which means that there really aren't any pre-programmed like swing grooves in the drummer track. There are swing loops if you're looking for if you're looking to build something with drum loops that are jazzy, that swing. My suggestion would be to download all the loops, and you can use this thing over here called the loop browser, and you can pick loops by instrument or by genre. So if I click instrument, I would find drums, all drums like this, and right here's 12/8 jazzy drum set. You can also click here and click jazz, and now it'll show me all drums that are jazz. So here's a bebop drum set. Right, nice swinging thing. Oops, I didn't mean to start my rock drummer. Here's a bebop fill. So it's like 2 bars of a snare drum roll, right? So if I wanted to start with something like that, I could put that there, and then I could have it start swinging, and I could loop the swing. So here we go. Here's a 2-bar intro. And let's change the tempo here. Let's make the tempo like 220. Let's make something fast. And let's turn on the Met. Oh, it's ready. Oh, it's double timing that. So let's bring it down here. Okay, so this bebop drum set is done at double tempo. You can notice 4, 1, 2, 3, right? But you could build something with loops if you wanted to do something that swings. But if you're using the drummer track, what you do is you choose a genre like rock and you pick a drummer. Each genre has a different set of drummers. So we're going to use Jesse, the funk rock drummer, since we share a name. And by default, they pull up a drum kit, which you can change, again, over here in your library. This is the same as using a MIDI instrument, right? So this is the SoCal drum kit. And this is the East Bay drum kit. Same drummer, different kit. Slightly different sound. The way you use this track is by using this little region down here. This is called the performance puck. You can move it between loud, soft, simple, and complex. So loud and simple sounds like this. Soft and simple sounds like this. Soft and complex sounds like this. Ah, you went to a side stick, right? And anywhere in between. Likewise, you can also tell the drummer which instruments to play. So let's say I want loud and complex, but no snare drum, only toms and bass drum. You noticed I turned the snare off, turned the toms on by clicking them. So we got like a, kind of like a rock, tom jungly beat happening. Want to add the tambourine to it? Great, we add the tambourine by clicking it. Want the tambourine to be more complex? You can change it here by going from 1 to 2 to 3 on the percussion area. Now it's shaking 16th notes, right? You want to add some cymbals and some snare and some hand claps, and you want the kick and snare to be double time. Look at this. It even has a double time feature. It has a half time feature as well. And we can make the cymbals be more bombastic. If I change this, now he's playing crashes. If I go to 1, it'll be simple. And we're playing in halftime. These are beat presets over here. So if I click this one, it's automatically going to do something for me, but I can adjust it. You can have a lot of fun with the drummer track. You can make it swing a little bit. If you click details, you can adjust the ghost notes, the feel of the drummer, whether the drummer is pushing or pulling, whether the hi-hat is open or closed. You can really customize this, how many fills the drummer plays. So for example, let's say I wanted to do like 4 bars, and then I wanted to do 4 bars of like simple and soft. And then I want to do like a 1 bar bombastic thing like this. So you see I can change these regions, and by clicking the plus, so this is going to be loud, complex, turn the fills all the way up, just turn everything on blast for that bar. And then this is going to be over here with toms and snare, and it's going to be double time. And so let's see what that makes. Simple and soft. Now here comes a bar. Right, and you can play with this all you want, but it is a really great way of getting at like a temp drum part or a temp track for something. You'll notice as you use the similar drummers over and over that they become, you can ascertain which drum kit it is or which drummer it is. There's only so much variation that a computer drummer can give you. But again, it's a great tool. These are all tools. For me, these are tools to get a real performance out of someone. And that's what I feel I got with the project I'm working on. Sometimes I will use these tracks for other things, but I don't often leave like the drummer track in as my drum part. Question here from Lee Hicks, the last one we're going to take. What do you recommend for recording a school's jazz band drummer with limited recording equipment? Again, right now, if your kids are recording at home, just have them use their phones if they don't have anything else. The more important thing with using the phone is really the most important thing with recording with any microphone is the quality of the sound source and the microphone's placement, both in reference to the instrument, but also in the room, right? The room makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. So here's what I would tell your kids. Depending on the instrument, you do not want them right on top of the microphone. If they're a trumpet player, many times it's best to turn to the side actually and have the mic here and, the trumpet turn to the side. We call that side address, right? We do that sometimes with real microphones. That might necessitate that your trumpet player make a separate video than their audio recording, because you don't necessarily want their video as part of your virtual collaboration to be them sideways. You might want them looking straight ahead, but the sound you're going to get may be very, very harsh. So you may ask them to do their recording, their audio version this way, and then just to make another one and finger along, right? Music video. Placement, though, distance from the instrument matters. We don't want the phone right on the bell. Likewise, if I was recording my drum kit, which is just behind my green screen, I would actually probably have the phone where I'm sitting, which is about 6 or 7 feet away in front of the kit, because I want it to get the full sound of the whole kit, the sound of the kit mixed together in the room. Which brings me to the other 2 important things. Sound quality, right? If you've got drummers or musicians who are recording at home, your trumpet players are probably playing the same trumpet that they play at school, so you know what that sounds like. But my guess is that your drummer, if you have a jazz drum kit at school with, jazz heads, meaning that they're not super muffled and they ring, your kid, unless he's a jazz drummer at home, probably playing on more rock sounding drums, right? I would encourage that person to, maybe if they know how, retune their kit so it sounds like a jazz kit. The quality of that sound, of the source, matters. And then the last thing is the room, right? Have your horn players go into the driest space possible, their closet. Someplace that's very absorptive for sound. In their bathroom is the worst. In the kitchen, bad. Any place that has hard reflective surfaces is not going to help you. It's better for you to be able to add echo and reverb later than to have, a really live or really bright sound. So my number one thing with asking people to do these types of remote recording projects is quality of their sound source, of the instrument sound, right? Recording in a space that is not too reverberant, and the distance between the microphone and the instrument, particularly when you're using a cell phone. So thank you all so much for coming, for listening to me today, babble on about Logic. I hope you've gotten some good tips, some good setup things. That's really what I'm most worried about, everybody out there, is getting set up for success, getting your settings right, knowing how to use just these super basic tools like looping, like trimming, knowing how to use your transport control, knowing how to cut, which is scissors, TI, right? Knowing how to use flex time if you want to edit any live actual audio tracks, and knowing how to use some of the MIDI things. So I hope this was helpful. I would be remiss to ask you to join Jen. I have been a longtime member of Jen. I was a member way before I was a part of the organization here. I joined because I truly believe in the power of this community to bring people together. If you call the office, you will get me on the phone. If you have any questions, if you'd like to become a member, you have questions about membership, email us, reach out to us. We are running a number of membership promos right now, which you've all received in your email. So please join our community. We have our conference coming up in January. We have a lot more virtual events coming your way. We have one tomorrow night. If you haven't registered for it, I would encourage you to do so. It's about applying for funding through Title 4A funds and through the CARES Act, which was created because of the coronavirus pandemic. We hope you can join us for that. That session tomorrow is at 4 Eastern. With some representatives from Yamaha. So thank you all very much. Please join the Jazz Education Network, and we'll see you on the next virtual event, or we'll see you at our conference in January. Take care.